list and recognized quite a few friends and people I've known. So thanks for signing up and tuning in, and hopefully we'll do this next time in person. It'll feel a little awkward maybe to do this on video, but of course we're going to get to talk in detail and look at all sorts of things that we otherwise couldn't do without getting on an airplane. So I've learned to feel a lot better about some of these video chats than I did at first. And this one in particular, I've been really excited for. So thanks to Stephanie and Bill for thinking of me. Flattered you asked, and thanks everybody for signing up. So we've got 45 minutes here. You know, maybe some questions at the end, take us to the hour mark. And my plan is to spend about the first half in here talking about how we age cheese. We'll do a tasting in here. I'll talk about cheese samples in a minute. And then the second half of the program, we'll go out into the barn and visit with some of the spring calves that were just born this year. And that'll give us a chance to talk more about cattle genetics and milk quality, animal husbandry. So affinage, cheese tasting, and then animals. What else would the girl want? A little bit of music at the end. Caitlin, my lovely wife, is holding the camera, and if we play this right, I tried to talk her into singing a song for you guys at the end. She's got a lovely singing voice. I don't, but I'll play guitar. So you stick around, and we'll maybe get a song again. But muted as you are, I understand you're able to shoot questions in to Stephanie via chat. So please let them rip, and Steph, if you want to interject. I'm happy to field questions as we go, and otherwise, the halfway point, maybe walking from the creamery to the barn, is a good time to take a few, and then, of course, at the end.
Great.
So here we are at the top, which is actually kind of the tail. I mean, we're looking at cheese before we look at animals, and of course, it happens the other way around. And particularly with our farm and our cheese, I think it's important to realize that the cheese itself is kind of an extension of the farm. And Stephanie talked about us being 20 years old. So cows have been milked on this farm for about 150, 140 plus years. Cheese has only been made here for 20 years. But about 30 years ago, the Gingriches and Patenots planted the whole farm to pasture and started rotationally grazing the cows. And most of you, I think, in the industry have heard that phrase. If you want to go into more detail, shoot a question. But rotational grazing is a style of farming in which cows are put outside onto pasture so they can eat fresh grass during the growing season. So effectively, they're harvesting their own feed and they're spreading their own manure. And this is an appealing setup for a dairy farm for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's better for the land. You're not plowing the soil, hitting it with herbicides and pesticides, trying to pound crops out of it every year. It controls soil erosion better, it builds fertility, it sequesters carbon, it protects water quality. The second leg of this kind of three-legged stool is that it's also better for the cow. I mean, cows are evolved living outside eating grass, not standing on concrete and eating grain. And so those two reasons have made it a compelling style of farming. The third leg of that stool, which is really what economically ties it all together for us, is the flavor that comes off of grass-fed milk in the summer. And this is not some, new world discovery. Most of us in the industry have had the chance to taste summer Gruyere versus winter Gruyere, or Comte or Beaufort. So for 900 plus years, we've seen this in the Alps. Grass-fed milk made in the summer turns into aged cheeses that are more complex, more interesting, fetch a higher price. So when Gingrich and Patenaude started grazing the cows here, it was for those first two reasons: better for the land, better for the cows. And they stumbled on the fact that the milk had such special qualities. Then came the cheese, and they looked for a style of cheese that was best suited to that summer grass-fed milk. And came across Beaufort and Comté, the classic Alp cheeses. And so it was really the milk itself that led them to start with this style of cheese. And that was a very long explanation for what might seem like a very simple decision, but I think it's key to understanding us because we look at the cheese as an extension of the character of the farm, as the expression of the farm's flavor. And that's kind of the opposite thought process, say, from some other new cheeses that obviously come out of the marketing department. What can we shake out of a bag into this, that, or what can we rub on the rind to meet this market niche? And there are roles for all of those cheeses. But what we're trying to do here is make something that tastes like the farm. And we'll talk about that a little in the barn, but the ways in which you do that, the most direct ways to connect the character of the farm to the character of the product is to use milk from your own herd when they're grazing your own pasture, to use unpasteurized milk, and to ripen it with a natural brine. And so I said what I'm going to say about grazing, raw milk. I'm happy to field questions about that later on. But what we're here really to focus on is the last part of that, is aging cheese with a natural brine. How does that contribute to the character of the cheese? How does that express the terroir of the farm?
Hey, Andy.
Yes.
Andy, I have a quick question from Meredith, actually asking how many wheels of Pleasant Ridge Reserve do you make? Did you make this year, and how many are you making, or how many did you make last year, and how many are you making this year?
Yeah, a numbers girl. I like that.
Yeah.
Here I am going on the romance, and what you're looking at here is the batch. Can you read that? May 15th of this year, 025. The O is for the 2020, the 25th batch of the year, 24th. Right now we're making 90 wheels a day. We got a very early start this year. April 21st, we started making cheese, which is a product of just the cows being ready and most of all the pastures being ready. So we have 4,000 wheels in the bank as of about 90 minutes ago. We passed the 4,000 wheel mark. So we're off to the races. In a typical year, we might make 10 or 11,000 wheels of Pleasant Ridge. So that is, about 10,000, 11,000 of these 10-pound wheels. And, 100,000 pounds of Pleasant Ridge a year. And Wisconsin as a state makes like 3 billion pounds of cheese a year. If you go a little ways down the road, you get, towards Monroe, cheese country. The bigger cheese factories down there make more than 100,000 pounds in a day. So, by any measure, we're small, I think. But you're looking at, one vat a day. This is what a vat produces, 90 wheels. We're in one of our ripening rooms here. We have a series of different ripening rooms. Right now, under the roof, we've got about 9,000 wheels, 5,000 wheels left from last year, 4,000 so far this year. We can hold, packed to the brim 14,000 wheels. So we need you guys to start selling more cheese. We're going to be able to fit this whole season in the caves. We're not here to talk about COVID, but that will be a difficult part of the situation for us is slow sales equals less space in the caves. What do we do when we run out of space in the caves? Typically we would sell milk, but of course nobody's buying milk right now. They're dumping milk. So
how many gallons? We have a couple more. throw just a couple quick questions at you. How many gallons of milk does goes into making one wheel?
Good question. I think in pounds. 100 pounds of milk is what? 12 gallons of milk, 8.5 pounds per gallon. So our cows give about 50 pounds of milk a day. So 2 cows in one day make us 1 wheel of cheese.
Okay.
We're milking 170 cows right now. So they're in the spring flush. It is so lush in our fields right now. So they're giving us 60 pounds a day. So 170 cows are making about 90 wheels a day. It is a 10% yield while we're doing all the math, which, I know you retailers work on tight margins, but, 100 pounds of milk to make 10 pounds of cheese is not an easy way to make money. It's mostly weight.
But I just want to point out that in your bio, you said you wanted to milk cows. That's what you really wanted to do. That's why you're doing this. So
yeah.
We all make our own.
Yeah.
So two things. One, you're getting a lot of responses from the retailers saying that they're on it. They're going to be selling your cheese. So
Thank you.
Yeah. Quick question about, I'm not sure if I should push some of these until you talk a little bit more about affinage. But I'll just jump in with one of these. So this is a question, is your milk thermalized at all?
Yeah, good question. No, it's not. And if you ask nicely, maybe when we walk out of the building, I can give you a quick sweeping tour of the make room. And there's no heat treatment possible here. There's no pasteurizer. So we make cheese 7 days a week, as many days in a row as the grass will hold out. Usually it's about 160, 170 days in a row we'll make Pleasant Ridge. We make every morning with the previous evening's milk, and that milk is chilled overnight. Legally, it has to be. So it's held at about 40 degrees in the barn in a big round stainless bulk tank. The morning milk comes out of the cows at cow temp, 100 degrees. And so the mixture hits our vat. As soon as they're done milking the last cow, we open the valve and the gravity flows right into the vat. That mixture hits the vat at about 75 degrees at about 7:30 in the morning, and we're off to the races. And, as a cheesemaker, starting out your morning with 75-degree grass-fed, fresh, raw milk is basically, it's like starting on third base. You just gotta walk it home. Very spoiled as a cheesemaker.
Great.
So affinage, ripening cheese. What does it mean? Some of you will have been at the ACS conference in Sacramento. However many years that was, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Michael Pollan gave the keynote, and great wordsmith that he is. He talked about cheesemakers being managers of rot. And, yeah, which was a good one. He also called us merchants of butterfat. That would be you, pride mongers, but I would be a manager of rot. Aging cheese is like a managed decomposition or composting. Fermentation primarily happens in the fat. You are acidifying the milk. You're breaking down lactose, the sugar in milk, into lactic acid, and that is the fermentation that creates acidity in the cheese, which is one of the tenets of preserving milk. The microbial activity that happens in the cave is not so much fermentation as it is metabolism. But in a similar way, and similar to, can you hear those big cracking noises?
Yes.
That is the ice falling off the cooling pipes in our cave.
Okay.
In order to give
this is what makes these fabulous. This is what makes a virtual counterculture fabulous, because you would not get that if you were in a classroom setting.
And really, it's all the product of vanity. In order for my skin tone to look right, we have the cave door open. So
it works.
Natural light, so the warm air is coming in, is melting our chilling So if we spoil a whole day's worth of cheese for this counterculture Zoom,
Oh.
it will have been worth it. I'll just talk faster. Microbes are doing the work. This is the same situation for almost all fermented foods, right? Cheesemakers are really just manipulating the conditions that cause microbes to behave in certain ways. We play with time and temperature. We play with acidity and sugar levels. So when you think about where flavor and aroma come from in a cheese, to back it up, flavor and aroma in a cheese are fatty acids and amino acids. Where do those come from? Well, the building blocks of milk or cheese are fats and proteins. And when you coagulate milk and turn it into cheese, you're harvesting those fats and proteins, clumping them together and separating them from the water, which becomes whey. So this piece of cheese is a big clump of fat and protein. And once you stick it into a cave like this, the microbes that are present are going to metabolize those fats and proteins, start breaking them down, start metabolizing or decomposing the cheese. And fats, of course, break down into fatty acids, and proteins break down into amino acids. So the process of developing flavor in a cheese cake is a process of controlling the microbes so that they break down fats and proteins in particular ways to give you particular flavor and aroma. So now you have to ask yourself, well, what are the players involved here? Well, certain sets of fats and proteins and certain microbes. Where do the fat and proteins come from? Well, they come from the milk, which comes from the cow, which comes from the feed and her genetic history. And so we're not going to talk today, at least right now, about the fats and proteins, but it is the key, I think, to the flavor behind grass-fed milk, the different types of fats and proteins that are generated by that type of diet. Instead, we're going to talk more about microbes. So you've got fats and proteins here. What microbes are on the scene to break them down? Well, the possible sources are from the raw milk itself, unless it's pasteurized, from the starter cultures that are added to the vat in the cheese making process, or from microbes that are introduced in the cheese during its ripening. And so when I talked about making cheese in such a way to express the flavor of the farm, well, using raw milk and natural brine is going to harvest as many microbes as you can from the farm environment, put them into play so they can influence the character of the product. So that exists in the milk, and it also exists on the rind. How do microbes get onto the rind? Well, several different ways. Probably the two most important ways are from the yeast, the brine, the moors in which we wash Pleasant Ridge. So much like a sourdough bread starter, we have a big tub of brine that we use and recycle and save. And so we'll wash old cheeses with this brine and use the same brine to wash younger cheeses. So just like using a sourdough bread starter to transfer that culture, the microbial culture back onto the fresh product, we're doing the same thing on the rind. And so we send in samples of that brine every week to make sure that none of the nasties are growing. We'll steer the people out set up. And every once in a while, we'll pay the big bucks and have the lab just identify all the microbes living in the brine. And we'll do the same thing on our rinds. We swab the rinds to make sure there's nothing bad going on. And every once in a while, we'll scrape the rinds, send it in. And the same DNA fingerprinting technology that's made 23andMe possible is also allowing labs now to identify DNA of all the bacteria in milk or on cheese. So every once in a while, we'll get a full catalog, and there are several dozen different species of microbes that are living on our rinds. And so that is sort of, that brine that we use is kind of what we would consider the house sauce It's something like the character of our raw milk. It's something that couldn't be replicated somewhere else. It is a product of terroir, which is a concept I know that gets a lot of slippery lip service. The way I think about it is terroir ought to be something you can see under a microscope. It's the ways in which microbes influence the character of a product. Microbes are specific to particular animals and farms, and greeneries, and wood boards, meats. And so when you're tasting Pleasant Ridge, you're tasting the microbial community of our farm.
Andy, couple quick things. First, there was a question about how you, I think it's, let me say, what steps are involved in your rind development. I think you covered that. And if not, I'm gonna, that's a question that he can ask. That's Kelsey asked that one. So maybe later on, if there's more that Kelsey wants to know. Then there's also, well, the first question we got, which is a little bit longer, but so bear with me. David Phillips said he just opened a wheel of Pleasant Ridge Reserve a couple days ago, and recent wheels have had a pink color, coral color rind, and a butter yellow paste. Do the colors fluctuate batch to batch, and what can they do to keep the appearance? They tend to get some fading, and he thinks he might need a different kind of lighting, which I'm assuming is in the store.
Yeah, hi Dave. Good question, and it brought up a topic that I was going to address a little later, but we'll get into it now. Some discoloration in the rinds of the 2019 cheese, which you're receiving now. And I got a real doozy to show you how bad it can get, if you want to call it that. And this was actually going to illustrate something I wanted to talk about, which is sort of the progression of a Pleasant Ridge rind. And what you have here is a case of kind of arrested development, which is what my mother used to say about me. It sort of never fully emerged from adolescence. So I'll get there, but I'll do that by walking you through the life cycle of a rind. And when I do get there, I'll talk to Dave about some ways to handle a rind that looks like this. So I talked about, kind of the general nature of ripening cheese, the microbial element of it. Now, physically and practically speaking, what does that look like? So I have in front of me, can you show that, Dana? A couple of different wheels of different ages. So what you have here is yesterday's cheese. You can see I'm smushing it with my finger how soft it is. It's been dry salted. We don't soak our cheese in brine, we dry salt it. So the day after it's made, rub it in dry salt.
Okay, just make sure when if you get a little too close, I think it's the sound, it's slowing down, the sound is breaking up, so be careful.
Okay, all right. Okay. So it goes through several days of dry salting. This is a very similar process to how you treat a young ham, prosciutto. The salt will be sucked into the cheese, drawn in by osmotic pressure, and it will also just form a kind of a crust around the outside of the cheese. If you've rubbed anything in salt, it's going to toughen up. So it starts to form a physical barrier that becomes the rind. So our rind ultimately is nothing but dried cheese. So after dry salting, we start brushing the cheese, and every wheel will get brushed every day for the first several weeks of its life. It's an immense amount of labor. And so this cheese here is about a week old, and it's, if you could feel it, it's getting a little bit velvety and soft, but I can't squish it anymore. So it's dried out a little bit, the rind's toughened up, and by brushing it every day, we're not only inoculating the rind with the culture from the brine I talked about, the sourdough starter, the house sauce, but we're also physically just working that rind to make it toughen up. This now is a cheese that's actually from right behind me. So it's almost a month old, and you can see it's gone from kind of buttery yellow. Now it's sort of chalky. It's dried out a little bit. So this is a durable dry rind, a month old. Finally, I have a cheese that's about 10 months old. This is from last fall. I think this is an October wheel, so maybe not quite 10 months. And this is what you're used to seeing as a wheel of Pleasant Ridge, that tan, brown, uniform. What I don't have in between these two wheels is an adolescent cheese. This is sort of infant. What comes after infant?
Toddler.
Grade schooler, and graduate
Thank you.
student. But that adolescent, in between this and this, it becomes kind of orange and tacky, and it gets very bright and glowing. If you've ever visited us in midsummer, they look like Werther's Originals, all these kind of glowing orange, 2-3 month old cheeses. And that's a point at which B. linens, the bacteria you guys have all heard about, the conditions are such that B. linens run rampant on the rind of Pleasant Ridge for several months. And eventually the conditions on the rind evolve to the point where they're out-competed by other bacteria. But for this moment in time, 3, 4, 5 months old, our cheese will be kind of tacky and orange. And then eventually it dries down into this brown. What happened with some of our 2019 rinds is that we had this kind of salmon pink glowing B. linen dominated rind that dried down only in patches. And we don't know exactly why it happened. We did have I think it was the wettest year in 100 years. Wettest year on record in Wisconsin last year. And so I think that probably contributed a lot to the fact that in some batches, parts of the rinds just didn't dry down, never matured, and stayed kind of orange and tacky. So I've cut open and tasted a lot of this cheese. This is actually from the batch we're going to taste here. This is the July 6th batch. There's some really nice cheese that looks like this. I'm confident there's no quality issue when it comes to the character of the paste. There is not a food safety issue. I don't think your distributor screwed it up and left it in his warehouse longer than he should have. What you're seeing here is just a reflection of a really wet season, I think.
Hey, Andy, quick question to add to this from Erica. Wanted to know if you ever adjust the amount of salt during dry salting, and if you do, why?
Interesting question. Do we adjust the amount of salt during dry salting?
Yeah.
No. So what dry salting looks like is a tub full of salt, plunk a wheel down, coat it in salt, put it back on. Plunk a wheel down, coat it in salt, put it back on. The amount of salt that the cheese will absorb is a function of its size, surface area, and moisture content. So we sort of give it all the salt. We make available all the salt it wants. It'll suck in a certain amount, and then when we start brushing, we wash off the excess. I know for all the particularity of cheese making, and in the make room, we measure things to a millimeter or a hundredth of a gram to just lap a bunch of salt on, like let it rip. But you could correct me out there if you're wrong, but I don't see much salt variation with Pleasant Ridge. I think doing it like this has led to a pretty consistent salt content. Okay. But back to the rind issue, and then we can taste this. Now that we've talked shit about it, we can at least let it redeem itself by tasting it. So I'm saying there's no food safety issue, no quality issue, but of course, a cosmetic issue, I think so, or potentially anyway. My hope is that once it's cut and taken home in a wedge of a half pound, third of a pound, that the blotchiness really won't be apparent. And you guys can tell me, or actually you can message me. The pieces that you received from this batch were all from wheels that look like this or worse. I took the ugly ones. Did they show up tacky and blotchy looking? Those were half-pound pieces. If you do unwrap a wheel like this and the pink parts are particularly tacky, you'll want to let it air dry. And of course, it's 80 degrees out, so letting it air dry in your shop, maybe not a good idea. You could let this, unwrap it and let it air dry in your walk-in cooler. 20 minutes, half hour, you're not going to ruin it. That rind is going to protect the cheese. If it starts flaking into, you rub your hand on it and it's crunchy little flaky bits, the rind is coming off and dry flakes, then you dried it down too much. But until it gets to that point, I think it's going to be just fine. So that's particularly useful if you unwrap it and you're about to cut it and wrap it in plastic. Because if it does come in a little bit tacky, putting it in plastic is only going to exacerbate that condition. So if you can, you do want to get it into your walk-in to let it breathe, dry down, 20 minutes, half an hour. So apologies, for the unsightly cheese. I think this is not an excuse, but there ought to be some line in there, like live by terroir, die by terroir. And this is not a death, but when you expose yourself to the conditions of the season in an effort to make a product that tastes like its place, you end up with a certain amount of variability. That's certainly the case in terms of flavor, and occasionally it's the case in terms of appearance. So if you have cheese like this and you feel like it's not going to work for you, unsaleable, call me, send me an email. We'll make it right, figure it out. But I think once you taste it, and especially once it goes home, cut up, it's going to look and taste really good. So we are close to the halfway point. If you would like to fire any other affinage questions, now's a good time. And
Yeah.
Otherwise, we could start to taste.
So it sounds, many of the questions are, the affinage questions are about this, if they get one that's tacky, and I think you've answered that leaving it out in the walk-in to dry a little bit is what's needed.
Yeah.
And yes, some people are saying that they got a tacky piece today, or in their batch for today. Left it out for 20. Carlos says he left it out for 20 minutes. It was perfectly fine.
Yes, and apologies. I know some of the cheese I sent you last week. It was 90 degrees. That was a difficult condition. So if those cheeses showed up a little bit warm, I apologize. I learned my lesson. I think shipping bits of cheese around the country in July or June.
Yeah.
That lesson is I'm going to let all the retail work stay with you guys. I'm happy making cheese and sending whole wheels. That is a lot of work dealing with the public and all those shipments. So to the cheese, I picked two cheeses for a couple of different reasons. Flavor comparison, and then also texture comparison. And as well, I wanted to give you a look at an example of cheese that's going out the door right now, and an example of what's on deck. So let's taste the July batch first. Everybody's got it ready.
Does everybody know what the July batch is?
They were labeled when they went
Okay.
out.
Okay. Just wanted to see if anybody was asking. Okay.
So I'm tasting off of a trier, which is always going to be a little different. But I've had plenty of this batch, and my cheese is also a little cool. This is, so July cheese, this is what's going out the door right now. And I think for most of you, you'll find some pretty classic Pleasant Ridge hallmarks here.
How would you describe the Pleasant Ridge hallmark? What's a?
Well, I think we can talk about particular flavor descriptors in a minute, but in terms of general, character of a Pleasant Ridge or a cheese like it, it's an interplay between savory and sweet, and that's what I think is so compelling about Alpine style cheeses, or in general aged raw milk cheeses. Is
Yep.
you've got both rich, big, kind of low end savory flavors, roasted meat or toasted nuts, umami. And on top of that, you have some more delicate sweetness. And that interplay between savory and sweet is what makes these cheeses so compelling and interesting, I think. And, I think that's why they win all these competitions. And you have a lot of cheese out there that's sweet, especially these days, and especially cheeses made in the States the last 5-6 years. We've gravitated toward a lot of sweet flavors. I mean, use cheese that tastes like a butterscotch toffee, basically. So it's fat and it's salty and it's sweet, and for most people that's just checks all the boxes. But for people that want to appreciate some more richness and complexity and savoriness, aged raw milk cheese like this is where you're going to find it, because the sweetness you can fake with a starter culture and pasteurized milk. But that kind of mouth-watering umami is got to come from character of the milk. I mean, they haven't figured out how to fake that yet. It's like tasting a natural broth versus a bouillon broth. And so this cheese, while not being probably a showstopper entirely, does, I think, have rich savory flavors, sweet finish, and it's what we would call a juicy cheese. It's making my mouth water. It's got good acidity. And that acidity, that lactic acid, I think will bode well for this cheese over time. This one, I think, could age for a little bit longer. So we'll move ahead now to the August cheese, and this is kind of a look at what's to come. Both literally and somewhat figuratively. So this cheese is young enough, it's not being shipped yet. But we have a lot of nice cheese from August and September like this. And this is a glimpse of, I want to say, a new style of Pleasant Ridge. But in the 2019, we pushed the texture a little bit away from kind of a drier, more granular feel to this softer, fudgier, creamier mouthfeel. I use the word fudgy. Some people would say toothsome. And what we're looking for is that kind of unctuous texture. You can smush it between the tongue and the roof of your mouth. And we will have already seen this with some of the 2019 cheeses you've received so far. And what's coming is a lot of what you feel, you taste here. This kind of soft, fudgy texture. It still has, I think, plenty of richness. This one hasn't gotten sweet yet. It's a little young. But it's a glimpse of of what's to come, I think. And so, you know, this cheese will probably be going out the door around Labor Day, maybe. And at that point, it will have dried down a little bit. It should still retain that kind of fudgy, pliable texture, but will have developed a sweeter finish, more similar to what you see in the July cheese. So, unless there's some tasting, which maybe I can feel while we walk outside. I don't want to run over, and people are on schedule.
Yeah, couple quick questions. Someone, Kelsey wants to know why you chose the that fudgier texture while you were moving in that direction.
Because I can.
Because he's the boss.
Personal preference, I think. And I think, to be honest, I think it had drifted towards a drier, more granular texture. The 2016s, 17s, and 18s, and
Yep.
I just find that fudgy texture, you know, so seductive.
Mm-hmm.
And but I would love to hear anybody else's feedback on that. You know, via the chat function or by emailing me.
So, yep, it looks like, I'm not sure if this is Laura Sutter, but it's LA Sutter, saying that they're obsessed with the new texture. So,
Yes.
a positive.
Yeah. The Emperor's new texture.
Yeah.
So I'm going to deftly change my clothes on camera. No,
Okay.
actually, I'll ask Caitlin to divert for a minute. I'm going to change my clothes. We're going to walk outside to the barn and look at some calves. But while we're soliciting cheesemonger feedback, and while Caitlin is here, she's about to paint this year's Rush Creek poster. And we're standing in the office with all the old posters. So she shows you some images of old posters, and you guys can message in or email us ideas for subject matter for this year.
Okay.
The painter herself is here to receive the input.
Look at that. Yeah. Caitlin, those are all watercolor, is that right?
That's correct, they are.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Beautiful.
Thank
I love that.
Thank you.
You can tell, you guys should know that you're getting a lot of positive response on the texture.
Great, thanks so much.
So where is it? So the inspiration for these are coming from just the farm itself, which I understand you guys live on the farm too.
That's correct. Yep. So I take a lot of pictures in general, but the farm has always been a big inspiration in all of my work. And when we decided to promote Rush Creek, I just thought it might be fun to have a yearly poster to send out and just help get everyone excited for the season. And it just made sense to obviously go along with the theme.
Yep. So Steve Newman says he loves the 2018.
Oh, thank you. All
Okay.
right.
Okay, we're gonna walk.
We're gonna walk. I'm gonna ask you a couple questions while you're strolling, if that's cool with you. Because these are all, I've been saving some of the cow questions, so I wanted to sort of throw them all at you. First from Carrie Jared, saying they're expecting some pretty severe heat and storms in Minnesota for the next couple of days. How do the cows respond to extreme weather? I'm sure as well as I do.
Yeah, good question, Carrie. They can struggle, obviously, and we respond by getting them in the shade primarily. We're talking about heat. So we've got, it's a 300-acre farm. We actually, this last year, bought the farm next door, which is a genius move on the front edge of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's a
Mhm.
great one.
Yeah.
So of the 500 acres, we got about 100 acres of woods. So we will go park them under the trees and get them out of the sun. But their milk production last week dropped to about 10% in that heat, and it's coming back up. But yeah, it can be difficult.
Someone's also asking, and I can't find it, what breed of cows? Oh yeah, here we
Yes.
go. From Kate. Excuse me. Mhm.
Yeah, I'll tell you all about that in the calf shed, which is right there. I'll quick
Okay.
swivel. There's the barn. The barn turned 100 years old last year.
Wow.
There's the house, and then the creamery. So you're looking at essentially my entire life right there.
Very good.
Yeah.
So while we're walking over there and you're going to talk about the breed of cows, but before you even get there, I'm going to ask a question from Melissa Stone. She wants to know how does the diet of the cows affect the amino acids and protein flavors in the milk? And follow-up question: what is in the grass that the cows eat? Which I think is probably related.
Yes, good question. You know, there are, you know, entire university semesters spent on that. You know, the short summary answer is that eating fresh grass puts different sets of fats and proteins into the milk than does a diet based on stored feeds. Hay, even hay is grass. Once it's cut, it changes the chemistry of the grass, and then the fats and proteins that are formed in the cow's rumen and mammary glands. So, you know, one example of this that gets a lot of attention, at least for a health perspective, omega-3 fatty acids,
Mm-hmm.
which are, you know, in a much higher proportion in grass-fed meat and milk. So that's one example of a fatty acid you'd find. And so, you know, as I said, when it comes to ripening cheese, and you're working with grass-fed milk, you're starting with an entirely different set of fats and proteins, and so the building blocks to develop flavor and aroma are altogether different. I also think that a key part of the flavor of pastured cows is the microbial community, that the microbes that live on a cow's udder. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of a behind the curtain type discussion. You don't talk about, you know, microbes on cows' udders to the public that often. But of course, we know that microbes, you know, that live in the milk are coming from the cow's bodies inside and out. And so you think about cows outside and dragging their udders, lying down in fresh pasture. That's entirely different ecosystem than lying down in a barn, even a well-bedded barn. We're going to go in here and see a straw-bedded barn for the calves. It's entirely different. And, you know, we know those pastures grasses are loaded with lactic acid bacteria. That's why you can chop up a grass field, pump it into a silo, and it'll ferment. It's full of lactic acid bacteria. And so I think that the cows being exposed to that environment brings into the milk an entirely different set of microbes than when they're, you know, standing on concrete and hay, sand, manure. I think that plays a big role, as well as, you know, what's actually in the grass to generate milk fats and proteins. So here we are in the calf shed. Can I give you a hand?
Yes, thank you.
Hello.
So we'll walk down to the end and talk cows.
Mm-hmm. Those look like Holsteins.
All right. You can say hi to these guys. There's a group at the end. We'll take a closer look at.
Mm-hmm.
The girls. Yeah.
So you have a mix of cows. You have, looks like you have Holsteins and,
Yeah.
okay, and brown, okay.
Okay. Yes. So we have crossbred cows, is what you would say. Meaning that we've crossed together cows with from different breeds into the herd, and this is uncommon but not unheard of. And that's primarily what I want to talk about today is, what we look for in a cow, why we've selected the genetics we have, and what role I think that plays in creating the character of our cheese. So different cows have different genetic histories, obviously, because of where they were bred and why they were bred. And so some cows famously have been bred for butter, say, like the Channel Island cows, Jerseys and Guernseys. And so their body type and their milk characteristics for hundreds of years have been designed around making butter, say. You compare that to Frisian or Holstein. Those cows came for the most part from Northern Europe, or Holland in particular. Flat ground, mild climate. Compare that again to, say, cows from the Alps, cheese-making cows from the Alps. Montbéliard, Tarentaise, Abondance. These are cows that had to get up and down steep mountains, make it through tough winters, and produce milk for cheese making. So, we know that all these breeds have different characteristics, and really, in a lot of ways, our approach to dairy farming and cheese making here is borrows a lot from old world tradition. Making the aged cheese with the grass-fed milk, making soft cheese with the winter milk, raw milk, fresh milk every day, natural rind. This is all kind of by the book, French and Swiss Alp style production. The way in which we really have differed from that model is in crossbreeding cows. So a lot of the old world cheeses have developed around the idea that this particular breed is best suited for this product and always will be. So if you're making Comté, you have to be using the breed of a Montbéliard cow. And I think differently. I think that by combining milk from different breeds, you can have access to more flavor complexity. And this is how I sort of rationalize that. So we know on the one hand that different breeds give different amounts of fat and protein, different types of fats and proteins because of their genetic history. And then we know on the other hand, as we learned, just inside now, that an aged cheese, the flavor and aroma it ultimately expresses as a result of the fats and proteins being broken down during ripening. So it occurs to me, my thinking is that the more different types of fat and proteins you start with in the milk, because you have multiple genetics, histories in your herd, the more different types of fat and proteins you start with, the more flavor and aroma is available to you in the finished product. And so, it's obviously not a black and white issue. You can have Comté from the milk of a single breed that's wonderfully complex. But when it goes back to our aim of making something that tastes like our farm and tastes distinctive, having an unusual herd of cows is really important
Mm.
So how do we do it? How do we choose genetics and choose animals? Whenever you combine genetics, you're going to get the offspring will be, you know, a mixture of the parents. And so when you have 8 or 9 different breeds in your herd, as we do, and you'll create cows that have unusual combinations from you know, their family lines. And when you see a combination of traits that you really like, that you want, you start saving daughters out of that cow.
Okay.
So every year we're continually saving daughters out of our best cows, our favorite cows, and thereby, you know, reinforcing those genetic traits. So what you're looking at here is the chosen daughters. So these are I think there are 37 keepers this year. So these are the 38 heifer calves out of the 170 we had this year, 180, that we are going to keep and raise into cows. And so you can see, you know, the mixture, the different body types, colors, the black and whites. Well, just because they look a certain way doesn't obviously mean that they're a purebred example of, you know, so that is not a Frisian, only a Frisian. Black and whites for us, instead of Holstein, would be Frisian. Those are from the Frisian semen we'd use is from New Zealand, which is still, you know, largely a pasture-based dairy system. So their genetics there, they took the same original genetic stock from Holsteins, but instead of moving it towards big animals suited for a confinement setting and, you know, maximum milk volume, as we have in the US, they instead took that breed in a different direction, made much smaller animals better suited for grazing. So black and whites would indicate Frisian, kind of reddish over there, ducking her head under the hay. She'd be like a Swedish red. We have some Jersey, obviously. 2007 there. We have an increasing proportion of Jersey, actually, which is a subject of some debate on our farm. We have some Montbéliard, Normandy, a few Tarantays. There you see that big brown and white. She's kind of a big, that is a big calf. That's a big Normandy calf. So anyway, you know, we have this idea of creating flavor complexity by combining different breeds. Then also there's a, you know, a set of physical characteristics that are important to us. And those, you know, don't make it into the brochure, I guess, but stuff that's important. Feet is a big one. Our cows live outside year round. They have to get up and down these hills and go out and harvest their own food. A lot of modern dairy cows just have crap feet. They just have ignored them in the breeding because all those cows need to do is stand in one spot all day on concrete. Fertility is a big deal. We have a seasonal herd. They all, they need to get pregnant on time. Our cows, you know, all have to calve in the spring, ideally in a 6-week window. So they're milking in time for the new pasture and cheese making season. A lot of modern, you know, I'm not picking on Holsteins. There's some wonderful Holsteins, but a lot of modern Holsteins have trouble getting pregnant on time. And we just started breeding now because, you know, a cow is pregnant for 9 months, just like humans. So that's breeding now for those first March stages. So feet, fertility, things like this. We like a smaller cow, more athletic. Again, just able to move around the hilltops and you know, make milk on a pasture system.
So we're getting on. It's 5. So I want to make sure that we hit.
That means we get to drink beer?
Yes, that you're gonna lead us all out with a song. Yeah, because we're.
Yes.
But some other questions while you guys are thinking about this. I'm actually interested in this one a lot. Is the texture that you were talking about in the affinage process?
Yeah.
Is that what is that a function of? Is it in the affinage? Is it in the what is it in the culture? Is it what is it? Okay.
No, good question. That is purely cheese making technique. You know, usually, yeah, when something goes wrong, I can usually blame the milk or blame the weather. There are actually things I'm responsible for, and you know, texture is one of them. It's a function of at which stage during the make process you're developing how much acidity. So it's what we would call the pH curve, the shape of your pH curve. So if you think of a graph, you have pH and time. You know, the milk pH is about a 6.7. And the pH over time, as you're making the cheese, the pH drops to about, what, 5.1 for most cheeses like this, which is where it stops. You know, for us, it stops at night in the presses, 5.1. All the lactose is consumed, fermentation is done. But the shape of that pH curve, is it steeper here and then flattens out? Is it flatter here and then goes steeper? That will determine the amount of calcium that's either trapped in the curd or lost into the whey. And the amount of calcium in the curd will kind of determine the elasticity of the curd. So it was a matter of kind of adjusting the pH curve. And I'd love to hear feedback, you know, now or throughout the season. If we push it too far, I think we'll get into, and we've seen it in some batches, it's almost a little like peanut buttery, sticky. You know? Which, again, some people may like. I would still like to have kind of a curd that breaks cleanly and is still creamy and fudgy, but not sticky. So if you find that, you know, some batches have gone too far in that direction, please let us know.
All right, cool. Any other pressing questions? There's some questions in here, Andy, which I think you can look at later on, that are sort of like a little bit, very close to some of the stuff that you talked about, and I think probably that would be worth. Yeah. So you can hit those. So let's have some music.
Should we? Shall we?
You guys, I just want you all to know that I was out in, I think it was when the ACS was in Madison, and they had a little gathering. Must have been in 2014, because it was just announced that Andy and Scott were going to be buying the farm, and they played some music there. And so I've been thinking about it ever since. All right.
We got it?
Yep.
Can you hear?
Yep.
There was a long smutsy put down. I put my foot on steamboat, sail the ocean around. I'm sailing around the ocean, sailing around the sea, thinking I had some Molly wherever she may be. Remember, Molly gave me your right hand, said if ever you marry, I would be wrong. But you broke your promise to go with whom you please. My poor heart is aching, you are at no use. I'm sailing around the ocean, sailing around the sea, making a handsome Molly wherever she may be. I went to church on Sunday, Molly came riding by. I could tell her mind was changing by the rolling of her eyes. Oh, I'll go down to the river, everyone's asleep. Pick up my handsome Molly and I begin. I'm sailing around the ocean, sailing around the sea, picking a handsome Molly wherever she may be. I'm sailing around the ocean, sailing around the sea, picking a handsome Molly wherever she may be.
You guys have, I think you're going to have to do this on every Zoom call from now on. Sorry. Thank you. You guys are fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephanie, for inviting us.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Caitlin. And you've got some comments about your artwork there too. So I think everybody likes a different one. So I think you might have something there. There may be a talent. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye. Thanks for taking care of our cheese out there. We really appreciate it.